maybe I have you guys introduce yourselves. Probably a little bit more people know Tommy, but soon they will know just as much about you.
Yeah, I'm going to go into politics one day as well, then they'll know me as well. No, I'm Camilla. I run a startup called Spenderlog. We have a couple of products in our startup. One is a tool where you can add your electronic receipts, and then you get a full overview of how much CO2 emission you have in your food. The other one is a product where you can see the details in your daily consumption, so you can know if you should cut a bit on candy, if you want to save for the next vacation, or if you get enough veggies for the kids. So that's the short story. Before doing this, I spent 20 years in the financial sector, doing whatever you do there. We can talk more about that if needed. Right now, a startup is much more important.
But I'll have you represent corporate people here as well.
Yeah, that's fine.
Two worlds. Tommy? There might be one or two people in the audience that don't know you.
So I used to be on the entrepreneurial scene here in Copenhagen, starting 3 tech companies, and then 1.5 years ago I joined politics when the Prime Minister called me and asked to be Minister of Higher Education and Science. And I had that role until June this year, where the voters said they didn't think it was a good idea that I continued. It wasn't on me, it was the entire government shouldn't continue. And therefore, but luckily I got elected into parliament, so now I sit in parliament as part of the biggest opposition party and trying to impact society through an opposition role. It's a lot of fun as well. It feels a bit like startup.
It is.
Because there's no money, no people, and no one cares about what you think. So I'm glad that you invited me here.
Good. So when you think about technology, and I know that you are quite deep in advanced analytics as well, and your startup is obviously created to do good for people.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about this, are you worried about the future, or are you optimistic about the future?
I'm very optimistic. So I do not share those doomsday prophecies. And I do think that, yes, we're going to lose jobs, but we're going to create new ones. And I think that you can see it already now, life is going to be easier for a lot of us with new technology. Of course, there are also threats. There will also always be threats. But I do believe that tech is here to make things easier for us and make things more convenient and enrich our lives. But also I'm biased, right?
Yes.
I've been doing this always.
This group of people is probably a little bit biased.
Yeah, I guess so.
Tommy, you spend a lot of time traveling the country this spring. The people that you met, are they worried? Are they optimistic around technology? Or is technology not on their radar at all?
Overall my sense is that the Danish population in general is quite positive. Because I think they do believe that the tradition we have had here in Denmark, when there's been major shift that we have seen in the past, we always got everyone with us. We never left like a 20-25% of the population behind us. And therefore they also trust society, trust each other, and maybe even also trust the politicians to make sure that also this time we get everyone with us. And when we compare to other countries, and I'm sure maybe these numbers even come from McKinsey, then the sentiment around technology in Denmark is actually one of the highest in terms of how do you think it will create a better future, worse future. It's actually one of the highest in the world. In the world,
yes.
Yeah. So, and I think that's because we have something quite unique, quite homogeneous society with a lot of trust. And as long as technology has not replaced that trust, that's also where it becomes dangerous, because if then we start having is that point where we have so much technology so we stop trusting each other, then we'll also lose that kind of key element in the Danish society. So that's probably, if I should have a concern, that's probably the concern. Not on can we create a better future, of course we can, but how to think that into the Danish context where we still have a lot of trust to each other.
What about the other goals than, you can say, job security and so on? One of the big debates of 2019, the topic that went from being important to being the topic, is climate. And I know that your startup also kind of is thinking that into your value proposition.
Yeah,
Is that something that the kind of customers are putting high on their agenda, or?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think so. So we started with creating a technology that could read your receipts and translate it into where does the money go. That's Spenderlog. But then we actually had a lot of requests from our users saying, hey, but couldn't you translate that into how much emission I have from my CO2 or from my food? And then we created CO2 food. And I think there's no doubt it took a little bit of algorithmic work. That's why we didn't do it at the same time. But I think we see actually a demand from people understanding these areas. And we also see that the users want it to be extremely easy. You know, there have actually for years been different kinds of tools where you can type in how do I live my life, and then you get a ballpark estimate. But people don't want to do that. They want it to just float in like everything else today. And I think that's actually because we're so tech savvy in this country. Everybody expects things to be happening in a second while, you know, in a blink. So yes, I believe that we are heading in that direction. I think what we're doing now is just scratching the surface. I think it's going to be much more relating to all the worries actually, because climate is of course very important, and that's one worry for people, and therefore they look in that direction. But when the next one comes, they're going to be looking there as well, because we are actually, I think, in this country expecting that technology will help us where we have doubts and need for insights and a need for educating ourselves. Don't you think?
Fully agree. No, I think we even forget that technology, in terms of the technology we're talking about here, which is digital technology, right? If we do stuff, you know, on putting a filter on our chimneys, that's also technology. But digital technology has already helped in a lot of cases. If you take a Danish success story around climate change or the transition, that's too good to go. And too good to go would not be possible if everyone didn't have a mobile phone with their location turned into their servers, because there they could get a notification saying now there's a meal ready for you now. So if we didn't have a mobile phone with that type of technology on it, that service would not be available. Another area a lot of people in the transportation business are looking at, I think 40% of the trucks are driving around empty. That's so stupid, right? Can you, with technology, with sensors and a platform where you could then offer cheap transportation from Aarhus to Copenhagen because there's a truck driving empty, could you then solve that problem? Yes, you can, right? So there's a lot of things that doesn't require new development. It requires existing digital technology that we have with our mobile phones and the internet applied to some of these issues, and then we could make not small reductions, but major reductions to some of the big areas around transportation and food waste.
But just a comment, when you touch upon too good to go, that's a consumer thing, and the trucks, that's more like a business thing. I think that's also two directions that's evolving right now. That of course we're doing a lot in the Danish technology. You know, all of the big producers are doing whatever they can to minimize any kind of emissions and do things more efficiently. I think we have very good examples everywhere around that in the big Danish companies. But I also think that we are to some extent failing on informing the consumer on their choices. Of course, we tell them that they should not fly, very easy. But there's a lot of information around their daily life that they actually do not have access to. And that's why we are doing what we're doing when we try to take the huge amounts of data that's around us and translate it into something simple that you and I can understand.
And act on.
Yeah, and act on.
And are people acting?
Yeah, they are actually. Of course, now the newest product, which is about CO2 emission, has been out there for like 3 or 4 weeks. So there we cannot really see anything significant. But the old product that's been out there for a year, there we could definitely see that people changed their behavior once they saw their own habits and what that led to.
I love this, because this is a very, classic example of if we insist on still having hope that we can create a better future, also when it comes to climate, and not go to dystopia, and then at the same time give people information. Then they both feel empowered and informed to actually change their behavior. And that's the most massive force we can have is not legislation. That is, actually people changing behavior, because then they start acting differently as talent, what do you want to work, and as consumers, what products do you want to buy, right? And that is, then the market will kind of, not solve everything, but definitely be a big part of the solution.
So we have, in many ways, in Denmark in particular, we have a unique opportunity because we have kind of this society that is kind of value educated, we have low unemployment and so on. But a lot of the technologies that are available are still being left on the table by large companies in Denmark. So you're smiling, and it almost feels like now all of a sudden you have even more opportunities, but people are not moving fast at scale. They're still dabbling around, doing small kind of agile scale-ups. A few of them are beginning to kind of scale up. And both of you have a significant background in very large companies. What is your perspective on that?
Should I go first?
Yeah.
So I think the Danish companies actually have the hugest opportunities ever to change. Some of them are doing it. They're doing it fairly slowly, but let's also respect that some of them are quite big. And this is a huge change management. And it's also, in my opinion, this is my humble opinion, I believe that a lot of them have to change the way they work. Now I came from corporate, actually working a lot with you guys, but I came from corporate, moved into startup, and the way of working in startup is completely different. I think some of the bigger banks are slowly moving in that direction. I think a lot of our energy sector is actually trying to move in that direction, but it takes a while, and they are not used to kind of turning the ship in one day. So that's why I think we're not seeing some very big things yet. But I think that several factors will drive them in the right direction. Of course, they need to perform, and it's faster and more efficient to perform in a different with a different way of working. But also, when they're going to hire the new talents, they will not be living with the way that corporate used to do, because they will have seen they are born digital. That's one big factor. They're simply born in a different way. I can see it with my kids. So they will not work like I worked 20 years ago.
In the bank.
In the bank. So they'll do something else, and I think that's going to shift those big companies. And then I think, for me, if a little piece of advice for my old employers is just take a chance, right? I think a lot of the things that's going on also in all the companies you guys support is very secure, right? We should not fail. We should definitely not take a chance, because if we fail, I risk losing my job, and we may lose a little bit of money. Then we would rather do all the certain things that we always did with no risk. So I think a lot of it is about risk perception and actually daring. And then it's about, bring in those talents and do what they want to do. Listen. If you do that, new things are going to happen. And to be honest, in the area where I move with the AI, so I do it, but I'm old. And I'm not born digital, so I had to I was taught this back in the days where we had Unix machines. My kids, they grew up with an item, some kind of item in their hand, one platform or another. They will do it no matter what I do, no matter how many books I read, how much I train, how many late nights I try to code this or whatever. They will be better than me. And I think that's a thing that the companies need to kind of adapt to, that the big corporates, that those young people should probably have a bigger role than it's, straightforward to give them.
It's actually a bit funny, because I totally agree everything you said, right? Because you're getting rewarded for, protecting the value you already created and existing. It's the innovator's dilemma, right? So even no matter how much technology we have, we still have the innovator's dilemma, right? Out in companies. But it's actually funny, because I've been, twice, 3 times in a startup, and twice got acquired by a big corporation, right? Citrix and Vodafone. And what I saw, especially at Vodafone, was that big organizations, they're not patient. They're very impatient, right? Normally we believe that the startup folks are the impatient ones, and then the big corporation, they are very patient. No, it's the other way around when it comes to innovation. Because a big corporation, they expect if they do something new, they want to see result, next quarter. And because they look at the startup world out there and believing, because they read about something yesterday in Børsen, then it probably started the day before yesterday and suddenly became a big success. So they fail to remember and see through an ecosystem of a ton of failures. And that some people that suddenly is a success in the newspaper, they've been trying this for 10 years. So startup folks are the ones with the resilience and keep on trying and trying and trying. Whereas a big corporation, they try something AI because they're willing to try, but they forget the resilience and the persistence. So they try it, and it didn't transform their business in 6 months' time. Oh, screw that, let's, forget that project. I tried at Vodafone. They acquired SUP back in 2008. They want to compete with Facebook, Spotify, everything out there, Twitter, Flickr, all digital services, right? They invested $1 billion, I think close to £1 billion in total, and they just scrapped the project after 3 years, kind of, right? And that's a bit the impatient, and therefore they didn't get these transitions. That they need to be more patient around these things, and remember how they built their own business originally. That was over a decade, and therefore new transition will also happen over longer time.
I saw they had a Capital Markets Day a week ago, and their story now is amazing. So it probably took 10 years to get there.
Maybe, yeah. They're not the dumb bit pipe, and
Overnight success takes 10 years. So there's a lot of startups in the audience here today. When we look at, because kind of you guys are both very positive. This is all going to be kind of great. We're a little slow on the corporate side, but kind of the population is ready, the tech is available, and so on. If you look at how well we are doing in Europe of creating unicorns, then we are being completely left in the dust by both kind of people in the US and in Asia. And you can really tell a story that our industry is just not adapting quickly enough, neither by creating new industries that are scaling, or what we just talked about, kind of changing at scale. So you can also tell the story that says, yes, that's all hunky-dory, we sit here in a little bitty corner of the world, but we are just not moving fast enough. And that has consequences over time, because our way of living and our values are going to be underrepresented in the world.
So I think two things in what you're saying now. One thing is about there's nothing that's negative. So from my perspective, it's positive, but some of these big corporates will probably lose their kind of position in the market because they're too slow. So for them, some of this can be negative, right? See how many, different kinds of sectors and that are being threatened right now by new upcoming businesses that do things more efficient and more digital. On the other thing that you're talking about around us not creating unicorns, I guess Tommy has some good example around unicorns, but I think that one of the biggest problems from a startup perspective in this country is the speed at which you can get some kind of investment. Because I think that there's actually a lot of people out that they want to invest, but there's a risk averseness in this country that's bigger than what you see abroad. And that kind of kills a lot of the startup already in the beginning.
From the capital side?
From the capital side, yeah. And if they're not killed before they even go to live, then they spend far too much of their time hunting the limited capital that are out there, right?
It's a very, very, tough question, right? Because I share the frustration.
You're a politician.
No. So I'm just saying it's a tough question, and therefore I don't get to answer it. No, I think technology. Actually, you said up there, you had a slide, I think, insinuating that technology is neutral. Actually, it's not right, because it does carry values, right? It does carry value on how do you prioritize. The classic example on a car, does it prioritize people or physical goods, right? So there's and therefore it's a relevant discussion on how do we impact the world and affect the world with technology built without values. So we need to be out there, be much more active. And I think one thing is the long-term perspective. Believe that our values are, interesting enough, and then stick to them. Because I do believe if you go into, one of the issues we have here in Denmark is we don't have enough talent on AI. What can we do to attract the talent? We can't give them a stock option program in Google or Facebook, right? Because we don't have these kind of companies here. We can offer them to build technology that live up to these values that they might also believe in. I'm sure there's a number of people, and I know in the academic environment in the US, there's a number of people thinking they'd rather build AI built for a societal, aim rather than a China version, which is the state, the government controlling people, or the US version, which is extremely commercialized, right, and try to get data out in order to sell more products, right, And the model here in Europe is, in most European countries, is actually quite different, right? Where we build it for, also for commercial use, right? But also for societies. And there's a lot of talent that would love to do that, but you just need to be able to trust in that's important and then tell that story. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we need to still, I was a bit, 5 years ago, I was a bit, critical around government interference in the startup world, right? Why do we need mixed funding? Anyone from Vækstfonden here? So that was a bit the question, right? Why do we need that? And then actually, then through some work that I did before going into politics for the government, we looked at, any other startup ecosystem out there. And it just proves that no successful ecosystem, including Silicon Valley, including Helsinki, Stockholm, and Tel Aviv, has been created without significant government intervention that is still there on the capital side. So when you look at that on the European level, then you're like, how can we get European companies to take bigger risk? So go longer on the journey because they sell themselves off to an American or a Chinese company, right?
Exactly.
And what we're trying to do, one of the things I negotiated while I was a minister was the next Horizon Europe program in the European Union, where we put 10 billion euros aside to try to get European companies to become the next platform to take bigger risks. So those kind of things we also need to do, but on a European level, so it's not a London thing or a Berlin thing or a Copenhagen thing, but it's all over Europe, we can do that. Then a third thing is, when startups consider to go abroad, then both Danish startups and German startups and French startups, when they go abroad, they think, let's go to US, because it's just such a big, easy accessible market. They don't think, if you're Germany, I go to France and then go to Spain, right? And, I wish they would start doing that, because I think, sometimes we're a bit, we think that, US is one big market, but when you're then there in US, it's also a hard market to tackle. And those states are also quite different. So maybe then we end up creating commercial successes here in Europe because we focus on the European market before we go to the US. It's a difficult one, but those were three things.
So next startup I expect is going to be a unicorn. So
yes, Venstre.
So you are currently launching products and building your startup. Do you have any wishes for the environment that you're in around data availability, data security, investment framework?
Yeah, I think I have tons. We do not have enough time for that today, but I think coming back to what you actually just said, I think you're lacking just one perspective, which is then back to what you're just asking about, and that is that we have a huge capital in our corporate world in Europe, and there is a very, very limited part of that capital that's actually working on supporting these future unicorns. And there's also a very, very limited, I wouldn't say will, but a very limited actual cooperation between startups and the bigger corporates. And I think if we can make that one fly, then I think we're going to cover more of these problems at once. And that's one thing where I would like things to be easier. That's actually, we've built a solution that heavily influences on some big corporates. And instead of actually embracing it and seeing it evolve and seeing it enrich their own solutions, they try to kill us, right? And I think we're not the first startup having seen this. So there's something about this. Startups, that's not a threat. That's also a political game. We need to teach these big corporates that startups is not, they can be, I acknowledge that, a threat to their life and their perseverance. But to a greater extent, it's an opportunity of maybe not creating a startup unicorn, but creating a corporate startup unicorn together. We have very big companies in this country and in Europe that have the options to take this to the next level if they want to do it.
But here we're relying on McKinsey to tell the big corporations what to do, right? That's your job.
Of course. Yeah.
Good idea. Give it back to the guy.
One of the things that we have been working with is agile procurement. Because what happens if you are a large corporation, you want to bring in this innovative cloud platform and so on. Either you go out as an executive with your credit card and just sign it up. That worked 10 years ago. Now you're just in breach of compliance and all kinds of things, right? And so getting procurement processes that actually allow people to test things out in a completely different way is actually a big theme. And it's a major holdback on innovation that these processes are not working.
It's amazing you managed to put agile and procurement in the same in the same sentence.
Yeah,
that's not the perception you have normally. But I think, and we could actually take that to the government or the state, right? Because it would be an advantage if the government here in Denmark, that is pretty much half the economy, if we could make a decision on being more innovative in our purchase policies, right? And more activist, right?
I think that's a huge issue. And also when you think about applying technology, you're not buying a system, right? The public sector is just buying systems, while they should be building their own capabilities to live in a system landscape and evolve it. So I think there is quite a lot of stuff to be done on that one. I think we start kind of to wrap up soon, but now we have a new European Commission, and we have a Danish commissioner on a very, very kind of central area. And as I understand it, they are kind of working on kind of in the first 100 days to make a new plan for boosting AI in Europe, a digitalization plan of Europe, and maybe adjusting some of the competition law so we actually create strong European industries. Do you have any expectation, either from a kind of Danish politician world or a startup world, that anything coming out of that is going to make a difference in terms of kind of legislation on data, in terms of investment environment, in terms of education, or anything?
Yes. I have one specific thing that I expect. Margrethe can do a lot of things, right? and when she gets into this, I expect her to look at the idea behind GDPR, right? To protect the data and actually insist on it's the individual owning their own data and can decide how it's getting used. It's good, but it's thought like 10 years ago because it took 10 years to get out into this legislation, so it's completely outdated the way it's implemented. Update that, so look at new technology, including blockchain. Could we use blockchain to make a solution where I, as an individual, own my own data, also my own commercial data? So, for instance, I've been, shopping at Amazon for 2 years. Now I want to go and shop at Nemlig.com, a Danish company that want to compete. If Nemlig.com does not have access to that data, it's very hard for them to compete with me because they don't know when I need new, toilet paper, right? But Amazon does, right? So if I could log in, the moment I log into Nemlig.com, I have a hash on my, that I own the data of everything I did because it's my purchase history, right? And then Nemlig has access to that as well. Not by sharing through Amazon, because Amazon would maybe not do that, but through me owning the data. Stuff like that, right? I think would give Europe a really, really strong hold because this is a major issue and will also become a major issue in the US. So I hope they can fix that, so update that boring, outdated legislation a bit.
I'm actually not sure it's that outdated. Sorry. I think that the intentions with it was good. I think that the way that it's being perceived is the problem. I fully apply to the setup of me needing to know what's mine and I can use it, but I think we can actually already do that today. If you wanted your Amazon data to go to Nemlig, you could request that. Problem is that technology is not really equipped for it yet. So we need to force Amazon and other big companies into having their technology equipped for supporting this kind of requests from the user. And also respecting that it's there. I don't know what the term is in GDPR, but there's something about you not hindering the transition of data. I think that's going to be the biggest one over the next coming years, and that's what she's going to... I'm looking forward to Margrethe actually starting finding these companies.
But I guess you need then some enforcement. So kind of, today Amazon is going to give you data in a huge PDF file.
Exactly.
Right, you get like 2,500 pages in PDF. Here on Nemlig.com, kind of here's my PDF file. So
but that's my point. I think we agree on. They should be forced to do it in a way because the technology is there to do it in a way where you just log in and then it's there, right? So.
Yeah.
Good.
But some enforcement, yes.
So, a final question before we have to wrap up here. My presentation started about talking about people actually worried about their children, what they're going to be doing. What is your advice to your children?
I think the best...
Other than stay out of trouble.
Yeah, stay out of trouble and get an education, right? No, my advice to them is to, educate and then continue to educate, right? The lifelong learning, right? And maybe it's only two hours a week, right? But we need to change our perspective on education. That's not only something that happens between 20 and 25 or 20 and 23, but it happens all through life. And also in a formalized way, and we have technology to actually do that in a way that does not kill the state budgets, right? With all kind of new methods, right? But have a perspective on education that is needed and go in depth a couple of years early on, so it's not all nano degrees, it's also needed. But then, keep on educating. And that's also, if you look back on why are we so positive around technology in Denmark, it's because we have one of the most well-educated populations in the world, right? So I think that's probably the key thing, right?
Yeah, so I actually have 2 kids that are getting these pieces of advice these days. And I'm saying the same thing, but I'm adding, do something where you actually believe that you can create a difference. because that's what's going to keep you going. You know, when I was educated 20 years ago, or 25 maybe, I think most of the advice you got was get into this sector. There's a lot of money in the financial sector. It's a good place to work. You can get rich. Whereas I say to my kids, go into something where you feel that you will change lives of people. Because, you know, money, it's fun in the beginning, but in the end, it's more important to do something that you actually want to get up and do every day.
I think that is fantastic advice.
And there's also a lot of money in that, by the way, in making the world a better place, right?
Yeah, if you're good at it, at least.
Exactly. Thanks, guys. This was super inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nick.